After 50 years of building a home brick by brick, I never imagined the words would come from my own son. "Mom, maybe it's time you find your own place." It felt like the walls I raised, the meals I cooked, and the love I poured into this family meant nothing. But instead of tears, I chose silence. And silence has its own power. That power would eventually take me from our quiet suburb all the way to Monaco. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If stories like this one resonate with you, hit subscribe. I have lived in the same house for more than 50 years. It isn't grand by any means, just a modest 2-story home with weathered bricks and a garden out back that my late husband Richard cared for as though it were a treasure chest. To me, it has always been more than a house. It has been a memory book, with every corner holding whispers of the past. The kitchen, for example, was the heart of our celebrations. Birthdays were never extravagant, just balloons, a simple cake, and Daniel's bright eyes shining as he blew out his candles. That little room saw more laughter than any hall or ballroom could ever contain. Then there's the staircase, its wood-worn smooth by the years of Daniel racing up and down, sometimes with scraped knees, sometimes carrying his school bag twice his size. Even the squeaky step, the one Richard always promised he would fix, became a kind of companion, and of course, the garden. Oh, that garden! Richard planted roses the year Daniel was born, and he treated them as if they were another child. Every summer, their fragrance would drift through the kitchen window, blending with the scent of fresh bread. Even now, when I step outside and see the roses still blooming, I feel Richard's presence in every petal. I belong to a generation that believed in certain values: loyalty, family, sacrifice. We didn't grow up with the idea that happiness meant chasing personal dreams above all else. To us, joy was in building something steady, in watching our children thrive. My own father, a stern but loving man, often told me, "Jessica, your family will be your crown." And I wore that crown proudly. I never asked for much for myself. While other women sometimes spoke about traveling to faraway places or treating themselves to luxuries, I was content with simpler things. A warm meal on the table, Daniel doing well in school, Richard by my side, that was more than enough. My happiness was wrapped around theirs. And when Daniel grew older and needed more college, a chance at a business, stability, I gave him everything I could. I even parted with the small inheritance my father left me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change the course of his life. That money was meant to be my safety net, my dream fund. Instead, it became his wings. I never resented it, at least not then. Now, at 71, my days are simple, predictable. I rise early, make myself a cup of tea, and sit by the window as the sun paints the sky gold. I take comfort in routine. In the afternoons, I volunteer at the library, arranging shelves and reading stories to children. And in the evenings, I walk past the oak trees that line our quiet street. They've grown taller with me, standing as silent witnesses to the seasons of my life. Daniel visits when he can. He is in his 40s now, successful in ways I once only prayed for. But when he comes by, it is often hurried. He sits at the table, glancing at his phone every few minutes, tapping replies to messages I will never see. His wife Melissa joins him sometimes. She is polite, always polite. But there is a distance in her tone, a carefulness, as though my very presence is something she must tiptoe around. We share meals together, but I feel the unspoken weight in the air. The clinking of cutlery sometimes drowns out the silence between us. Daniel still smiles, but it's different now, quicker, less warm, more distracted. And when he jokes, it's often about the house. "Mom, this place is huge for just you," he'll laugh, glancing around as though the walls are too wide. "You could probably get lost in here." Melissa will nod, her voice soft but deliberate. "You know, Jessica, there are wonderful retirement communities now, lots of activities, people your age. You'd never feel lonely." I smile when they say these things, as though I am amused, as though the words bounce off me. But inside, I feel the sting. Every remark is like a thread unraveling, loosening the bond I thought would always hold us together. They don't see it, but I notice how their suggestions come more often now. Retirement homes, smaller apartments, better for you, they say. They mean well, or so they believe. But to me, it feels like the edges of my world being trimmed away. What they don't know, what I have never told them, is the depth of what I gave up for them. Daniel's education, his early ventures, all of it was built on the foundation of sacrifices I made quietly. The inheritance I poured into his future, the trips I never took, the dreams I folded neatly and tucked away in drawers. I once imagined walking the streets of foreign cities, tasting food from markets where no one knew my name, seeing the world Richard and I used to talk about late into the night. but life had other plans. And I convinced myself that my son's happiness was enough to fill those spaces. Now, I wonder if he even remembers, or if Melissa ever knew. I don't say any of this aloud. I keep my silence, just as I always have. Silence has been my companion all these years. The silence of letting others speak first. The silence of putting my own wants last. But silence is not empty. It carries storms inside it, and mine is beginning to swell. From the outside, it might look as though I am simply a 71-year-old woman living a quiet life in her old home. But inside, I feel the cracks forming, the faint tremors of change. My life may have been built on sacrifice, but perhaps it is not too late to ask, what about me? I sip my tea, looking at the roses through the window. They bloom year after year, no matter how harsh the winter. Maybe I, too, have one more season left to bloom. That evening is etched into my heart like a bruise that never quite fades. Daniel had stopped by after what he called a silly spat with Melissa. He looked tired, irritated in that way grown children sometimes do when they no longer want to explain the details of their private lives to their parents. I didn't press, I simply made him tea, the way I always had. He sat at the kitchen table, tapping at his phone between sips. The silence stretched between us until he finally looked up, his words careless, as though they cost him nothing. "Mom," he said, "maybe it's time you find your own place. You don't need this big house. You'd be happier somewhere smaller." For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. My heart seemed to stumble in my chest. I stared at him, the son I carried for 9 months, the boy whose scraped knees I once kissed better. Did he really just say that? But my lips didn't move, my throat closed. I said nothing. Not agreement, not refusal, just silence. He mistook that silence, I think, as a kind of acceptance. He gave a quick nod, took another sip of tea, and went back to his phone. But inside me, something broke. That night, after he left, I sat in Richard's old chair. The leather had softened with age, shaped now to my body as much as his once. On the wall above it hung our wedding photo. We were so young then, smiling as though the world itself had been handed to us. I whispered into the quiet, my voice trembling. 50 years, Richard, and this is where we are." The house felt suddenly cold. The walls seemed to echo with memories, but they no longer comforted me. They mocked me. In the days that followed, I carried those words inside me like a stone. At church, as I arranged hymn books, I overheard women my age speak in low tones about being urged to sell their homes, to move into communities. One woman, a widow like me, confided that her children told her she was a burden. Another said she was given brochures for assisted living, as though her independence were a problem to be solved. And at the library, while shelving books, I watched an old man sit alone at a table, flipping through the newspaper. When his daughter arrived, she greeted him quickly, checked her watch, and hurried him along. He moved slowly, his cane clicking on the tiles, but she walked 3 steps ahead, barely turning to see if he was keeping up. I realized I was not alone in this quiet dismissal, this subtle pushing aside of the old to make room for the new. There is a cruelty in it, though no one calls it by that name. They dress it in words like practicality, efficiency, what's best, but underneath it feels like rejection. Daniel's hints soon grew bolder. One Sunday afternoon he arrived with Melissa. They placed glossy brochures on my table, the kind with smiling gray-haired couples playing cards or walking manicured lawns. "Look, Mom," Melissa said with a rehearsed brightness, "you'd have activities every day and people your age to talk to. You wouldn't feel so alone." I turned the pages slowly, my hands steady even as my stomach tightened. Community, the brochure promised. Safety, simplicity. Daniel chimed in. "You'd have less to worry about. No yard to maintain, no stairs to climb. You deserve that kind of peace." Then Melissa let the truth slip, her words almost casual. "And the house, well, it could be sold. The money could help with future family needs. Daniel's been thinking about some expansions, investments. It would benefit everyone." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her smile was polite, but her eyes gleamed with calculation. The house I had built, the walls that had heard every prayer and every tear, reduced to future family needs. I said nothing. My silence, again, they mistook for weakness. Not long after, Daniel lost patience. "Mom, why are you being so stubborn? We're just trying to do what's best for you. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout that I had carried him, clothed him, sacrificed for him, and that stubborn was a word that did not belong to me but to his own blindness. But the words stayed locked inside. Instead, I folded the brochures neatly and tucked them into a drawer. That night, when the house was quiet again, I went to my desk. I pulled out old files, papers I hadn't touched in years. Among them was a key, small, brass, worn. It opened the safety deposit box Richard and I once used. The next morning, I went to the bank. The clerk brought out the box, heavier than I remembered. Inside were documents I had almost forgotten, savings Richard had set aside, untouched. And there it was, the deed to the house. My name, not Daniel's, not Melissa's. Mine. For decades, I had thought of this house as a shared family legacy. Richard built it, Daniel grew up in it, and I tended it. But as I stared at the papers, I realized something that felt almost radical. It was mine, my life's work. My gift, yes, but not a chain around my ankle. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Ownership, power. That evening, I walked into the garden. The roses Richard planted were in bloom, soft red petals catching the last light of day. I trimmed a few, the thorns pricking my gloves. I stood there, the fragrance surrounding me, and whispered softly into the breeze. You always said this house was our gift to the family, Richard. Maybe it's my gift to myself now. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Melissa. Let them think they had persuaded me, that I was bending to their will. My quiet smile, my nods, it all seemed to reassure them. They believed they'd won. But silence has many shades. This time it was not submission, it was planning. I moved through my days as if nothing had changed. I still made tea in the mornings, still walked past the oak trees, still arranged books at the library. Daniel and Melissa continued their gentle prodding, thinking I was finally ready to comply. They mistook my calm for surrender. What they did not see was the gathering of quiet courage within me. What they did not know was that my silence was no longer the silence of sacrifice, but of preparation. The storm inside me had turned into something steadier, a decision. The day began like any other, at least on the outside. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, dust motes dancing in its golden light. But outside the house, unfamiliar trucks pulled up, men in uniforms carrying boxes. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, whispering, wondering what was happening. I stood by the window, my teacup warm in my hands, watching as strangers carefully packed the life I had lived here. The photographs, the books, the furniture Richard and I once saved months to buy. All of it, piece by piece, carried out. When Daniel arrived, his car screeched against the curb. He rushed out, his face pale with shock. "Mom!" he shouted, his voice breaking the air like thunder. What on earth is going on here? I turned slowly, as calm as the roses in the garden, and met his eyes. "The house is sold, Daniel." He froze. For a moment, his jaw hung slack, his hands gripping his car keys so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Sold? Without telling me?" He took a step closer, his voice rising. "How could you do that? This was my childhood home." I placed the teacup gently on the counter. My voice was steady, almost quiet, but every word cut clear. "Yes, Daniel, your childhood home." "But my life's work." The words seemed to strike him harder than any shout could have. He blinked, stunned, as if hearing me for the first time in years. "You should have come to me," he sputtered. "We could have." "We?" I interrupted, tilting my head. "Daniel, when did this house become yours to decide for?" I carried its weight. I tended every corner. I paid every bill after your father passed. And do not forget, it was my inheritance, my sacrifice, that made your education, your business, even this life of yours possible. His mouth opened, then closed again. I saw the boy in him for a moment, the boy who once looked to me for every answer, every bit of comfort. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man too used to convenience. "You've been talking about me finding my own place," I continued, my tone firm but not unkind. "Well, I did, just not the one you imagined." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I let the silence linger, the kind of silence that makes the air heavy. Then I told him. "I sold the house not to move into a retirement home, but to fulfill a dream that has waited 50 years. I booked a one-way ticket to Monaco." The name seemed foreign on his tongue as he repeated it. "Monaco? Mom, that's ridiculous. You don't know anyone there? You've never traveled that far? It's ridiculous," I echoed softly, though my eyes didn't leave his. "What's ridiculous, Daniel, is forgetting who carried you in her body, who built your foundation with her hands, who gave up her own dreams so you could chase yours. What's ridiculous is treating me as though I am a burden, as though my only worth lies in making space for your comfort." He stared at me, stunned, and for once he had no quick reply. I walked past him toward the door where the movers carried out the last of my boxes. My voice followed behind me, calm, resolute. "I am not a burden, Daniel. I am a woman who still has life left to live, and I will not spend it waiting quietly in the corner until you decide I matter again." The young couple buying the house arrived just then. They carried a little girl who looked no older than Daniel had been when Richard planted the roses. She clutched a small stuffed bear, her eyes wide with wonder as she gazed at the garden. I smiled at them, extending my hand. "Welcome home," I said. And I meant it. Daniel looked at the family, then back at me. He was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't understand, not yet. Maybe he never would. But for the first time, I didn't need his understanding to feel free. The movers loaded the last of my belongings into a storage container headed for the airport. My passport and plane ticket rested in my purse. Richard and I had once dreamed of Monaco, of standing by the sea, of hearing languages that weren't our own. Life and responsibility had kept us rooted. But now, at 71, with my hair silver and my hands lined, I would go for both of us. As evening fell, I found myself at the airport, the hum of departure announcements echoing above. I held a single carry-on bag, simple, light. Inside was a framed photograph of Richard and me on our wedding day, and another of Daniel as a boy, gap-toothed and grinning. I moved through security, boarded the plane, and found my seat by the window. As the engines roared to life, I pressed my palm against the glass. The city lights stretched beneath me like constellations, fading as we lifted higher into the sky. In my hand, I held Richard's worn photo, the edges frayed from years of love. I smiled through the tears in my eyes and whispered, so softly only he could hear, "We made it, love, just a little later than planned." The plane soared into the night, carrying me not away from something, but towards something new. Not exile, not banishment, but freedom. For the first time in decades, my silence was not the silence of sacrifice. It was the silence of peace. I never thought I would find myself here, an elderly woman, 71 years old, sitting by the turquoise waters of Monaco with a cup of tea in my hands. And yet, the air feels lighter here, almost as if I have stepped into a chapter that was waiting patiently for me to turn the page. My new apartment isn't large, but it doesn't need to be. It sits above a small bakery, and each morning the scent of fresh bread greets me before I even open the shutters. The sea is just a short walk away, and its rhythm has become my clock. I go to the open-air markets in the mornings, choosing olives, herbs, and bread with care, as if I were learning how to live again. In the afternoons, I often sit by the harbor, watching the white sails drift against the horizon. Couples stroll past, children run along the promenade, and I find myself smiling, not with envy, but with peace. For so many years, my identity was tied to sacrifice, to giving, to being the anchor for others. Here, in this little corner of the world, I am simply Jessica. And that is enough. I have grown fond of walking the cobblestone streets in the evenings. There's a music cafe not far from my place, where the sound of a violin drifts out into the night. I linger sometimes, letting the notes carry me back to the days when Richard and I would dance in the living room, careful not to wake Daniel upstairs. I like to believe Richard would have loved it here. Perhaps he is walking beside me now, smiling at the way the sea breeze tangles my hair. Back home, Daniel must be adjusting to my absence. The house is no longer his to inherit or control. It belongs to another family now, one who will fill it with their own laughter and milestones. I imagine he drives past it sometimes, staring at the garden where his father once knelt, perhaps wondering how easily he let words slip from his mouth that pushed me away. One afternoon, I received a postcard in the mail slot outside my door. It was from Daniel. The handwriting was messy, as if rushed. "Mom, I didn't think you'd really go. The house feels empty without you. I hope you're happy there." I don't know what else to say. I smiled softly, pressing the card against my chest. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the first crack in the wall of his pride. Perhaps one day he will understand. Until then, my silence remains my answer. Of course, I had written to him first. A simple postcard with a picture of the coast, the waves sparkling under the Mediterranean sun. I had written, "Monaco is beautiful. I hope you and Melissa are well. Remember, respect isn't given, it's lived. Love, Mom." I didn't ask for forgiveness or seek pity. I only left him with truth. Here, people see me as a woman, not as a burden, not as someone who has outlived her usefulness. The neighbors wave, the shopkeepers greet me warmly, and the world feels open in a way it hasn't for decades. Some nights I sit by my window with a cup of tea, looking out over the sea, and I whisper to Richard, "We made it, love, just a little later than planned." There is nostalgia in me, yes. A soft ache for the years gone by, for the faces I will always love. But it is not the kind of ache that weighs me down. It is gentle, like a hand on my shoulder reminding me of where I came from. For so long, my life was about holding everything together for others. Now it is about holding myself with care. I have lost a house, but I have gained a freedom I never thought possible. And perhaps that is what dignity truly means. Not in clinging to the past, not in bitterness, but in choosing to live with quiet strength until the very end. So, here I am. Jessica, 71, sipping tea at a seaside cafe. The sea stretches wide before me, the sun painting golden light across the waves. Families laugh, lovers hold hands, and I watch them with a smile. I have stories behind me and still hope ahead of me. I thought I had given everything away, but the truth is, I have just begun to give to myself.